This is Magic Treehouse number 22. Hurry up, Houdini. This is the Merlin missions, and we're going to read chapter 4. Okay, goodbye. Sold out, Jack said to Annie, an hour ago. I know, you were right, I was wrong, Annie said quickly. We should have come earlier. Jack just stared at her. I'm sorry, said Annie, making a face. Really? She looked around. So do you think anyone in line will sell us their tickets? Not in a million years, said Jack. I can't believe this. How can we meet Houdini now and learn his secret of greatness? We'll figure something out, said Annie. I always do. Don't worry, let's think. She pulled on her braids and bit her lip as she stared at the window of the box office. Jack couldn't get over his frustration. I just can't believe it, he said. Maybe this is the secret of greatness. Don't listen to your sister. Buy your tickets ahead of time. He held up his hand and wiggled his finger. Afraid the ring of truth isn't glowing, he said. Too bad. Wait a minute, said Annie. Doesn't this remind you of the time we went to Shakespeare's Theatre in London and the two actors didn't show up for the play? I don't want to talk about our other missions now, Jack said. He pulled out their booklet and turned the pages, hoping to find more information about Houdini. But don't you remember how Shakespeare put you and me in the play instead? Said Annie. Jack ignored her. I don't see anything else in here about Houdini. Just this one show, he said, scanning each page. It was so cool, and we had a great time. Do you want to give it a try? Said Annie. Do you? Jack closed the booklet. Do I what? He asked. Do you want to use Merlin's magic mist and make a wish to be a great stage magicians? Said Annie. Stage magicians? Said Jack. Yes, you and me. We go on stage in place of the Bambini brothers, said Annie. What? Are you out of your mind? Said Jack. Think about it. It's a great plan. That way we can meet Houdini backstage. We'll be fellow performers, said Annie. Plus, we'll be helping out Mr. Dewey in his theater. And, not to mention, it would be incredibly fun. That plan's ridiculous, said Jack. No one's going to let us go on stage and do a magic show. You are so wrong. I'll bet I can make it happen, said Annie. Watch. Wait, said Jack. But Annie dashed to the box office window and tapped on the glass. When Mrs. Crenshaw opened the window, Jack leaned forward and spoke in a hushed voice. What are you saying to her? Jack called. Mrs. Crenshaw immediately closed the window and left the box office. Annie, what'd you say? Asked Jack. The theater door swung open. Inside, quick, Mrs. Crenshaw said to Annie. Wait, where are you going? Jack started to follow Annie into the theater, but the door closed behind her and locked. Jack went back to the box office and looked through the window. Annie was talking enthusiastically to Mrs. Crenshaw and Mr. Dewey. Jack couldn't hear a word she was saying. Enthusiastically means? Like really excited. Jack tapped on the window and shook his head, but Annie ignored him. As she kept talking, Mr. Dewey's expressions changed from frowning to squinting to smiling to laughing, and to suddenly he shouted, Yes! No, thought Jack. With a big grin, Annie shot her fist into the air. The next thing Jack knew, she was racing out the theater door. I did it, we have a show to do, she cried. He said yes. But I didn't say yes, said Jack. Don't worry, I fixed everything. For us and Mr. Dewey, said Annie. What did you tell him? Said Jack. Before Annie could answer, Mr. Dewey rushed out of the theater. Hurry, kids, he shouted. And there's Jack and Annie in front of the theater when Mr. Dewey. Come on! Annie grabbed Jack's hand and pulled him towards the door. Mr. Dewey pushed Jack and Annie into the theater and locked the door behind them. George, he called to an usher. Quick, change the sign. Erase the Bambinis. Write Jolly Jack and the Amazing Annie instead. Jolly Jack, thought Jack. This way, Mr. Dewey hustled Jack and Annie through the theater lobby and into a large auditorium. The auditorium had rows and rows of floor seats, as well as box seats and a balcony. Electric lights cast a peach-colored glow over a stage framed by a red curtain. Is that where we'll perform? Annie asked. No way, Jack whispered to her. Yes, that very stage, boomed Mr. Dewey. In the orchestra pit, a violinist was making squeaky sounds. A drummer was setting up his cymbals, and a trumpet player was practicing on his horn. Do they play tonight? Said Annie. For the Houdini show, said Mr. Dewey. But if you like, I'm sure they can accompany your routine, too. Yes, I like, said Annie. She turned to Jack. Did you hear that? We get music. Annie, I didn't agree to do this, Jack said under his breath. He was fuming. What's fuming mean?
I don't know.
If you're fuming, you're mad. You're not very happy.
Hey.
Yes. Come along to your dressing room, said Mr. Dewey. Jack didn't move, but Annie skipped down the aisle after Mr. Dewey. I didn't agree, Annie, Jack yelled from the back of the auditorium. The clashing cymbals drowned out his voice. Annie, come back, he yelled louder. But Annie followed Mr. Dewey through a door to the backstage area. Darn her, said Jack, and he hurried down the aisle. He slipped through the door marked backstage and stepped into an empty hallway. Where does she go? Jack muttered. He heard voices. He walked down the hall to the backstage area where he found Mr. Dewey talking to a bald man with a clipboard. There he is, said Annie, pointing at Jack. Meet Jolly Jack, Mr. Dewey said to the bald man, other half of the famous brother and sister team, Jolly Jack and the Amazing Annie. These little kids are filling in for the Bambinis tonight, the bald man asked. We're not so little, said Annie, and we've been stage magicians for years. Excuse me, my sister's made a mistake. We can't do this, said Jack. We don't have our costumes. We don't have anything. Not a problem, said Mr. Dewey. The Bambinis left all their props and costumes behind. See? Annie said to Jack. But, started Jack. I'm turning you over to Mr. Wilson, our stage manager now, said Mr. Dewey. Good luck. I have to tell Mrs. Crenshaw to open the doors and let the horses inside. No, the hordes inside, like large groups of people. The show will go on. Mr. Dewey then disappeared down the hall. You kids better know what you're doing, said Mr. Wilson, shaking his head. Saturday night crowds can be pretty wild. Don't worry, Annie said with a grin. Our magic act can get pretty wild, too. Jack couldn't believe her. She had completely taken over their whole mission. Mr. Wilson laughed. Good, he said. I'm glad you're so confident, Amazing Annie. Come with me. Your dressing room is next to Mr. Houdini's. Cool. Is Mr. Houdini here now? Annie asked as they followed Mr. Wilson. Nope, he won't get here before 8:30, said Mr. Wilson. He led them down the hallway and opened a door. Here you go. The stage manager waved Jack and Annie into a small room. See, the Bambinis left behind all their stuff. Use anything you need. You can wear their costumes, too. Both guys were kind of short. It all looks great, said Annie. On the dressing table were wands, cards, silver rings the size of dinner plates, top hats, bow ties, and white gloves. Strewn over a chair were tuxedos, shirts, and vests. Oh, wow, look, said Annie. On the floor were 2 cages. One held 3 white rabbits. The other held 2 white doves. They're so cute, said Annie. What are they doing here? They're part of the act, said Mr. Wilson. He looked puzzled. Most magicians use doves and rabbits. You don't? Oh, sure, Annie said quickly. Absolutely we do. This is crazy, said Jack. We can't just use the Bambini's animals and birds and costumes and props. What if they come back? They won't come back, said Mr. Wilson. Dewey's threatened to call the police. They've stolen from the theater twice now. After the show, Mrs. Crenshaw's going to take the birds and rabbits home to her kids. Oh, nice, said Annie. And there's backstage with all the props that they found and the animals. You think Annie should have volunteered them for that?
No.
You have 35 minutes, said Mr. Wilson, looking at his pocket watch. You'll go on at 15 minutes after 8 and do a 30-minute show. Got it? Okie dokie, said Annie. Good. Get ready. I'll call you, said Mr. Wilson. The stage manager left, closing the door. Annie grinned at Jack. Do you believe this? She said. No, I don't, Jack said coldly. The smile left Annie's face. What's wrong? You don't seem very jolly, she said. I'm not jolly, Jack said. I'm angry. Really angry. Why? Asked Annie. Because we didn't decide on this together, said Jack. You didn't even listen to me. Just like you didn't listen to me when I wanted to buy our tickets early. But with the magic mist, this could be so much fun, don't you think? Said Annie. Plus, we'll meet the great Houdini for sure. And we'll help Mr. Dewey in his theater. It's a good plan, Jack. It might be a good plan, said Jack. That's not the point. The point is we didn't talk about it together. We're supposed to be a team on our missions. But if it's a good plan, what difference does it make if we didn't talk about it, said Annie. Why can't you just go along with me? Because I don't want to, said Jack. You decided by yourself to do this, so just do it by yourself. Just go on the stage and use the magic mist all by yourself. Really? Said Annie. Really, said Jack. Well, fine, said Annie. Okay then, said Jack. Goodbye, said Annie. Goodbye, said Jack. He stormed out of the dressing room, banging the door shut behind him. He walked briskly down the backstage hallway, through the doors, and into the auditorium. A rowdy crowd was streaming down the aisles. Ushers yelled at teenagers who were shoving each other and fighting over their seats. Hooligans, Jack thought. Glad he didn't have to perform. Jack made his way through the auditorium, then through the packed lobby. He slipped by the ticket taker and squeezed past people streaming into the theater. Jack walked away from Henderson's music hall as fast as he could. He hurried up the avenue, weaving his way through the crowds on the sidewalk. She can just do it by herself, Jack thought. I don't care. She can use Merlin's magic mist all by herself. She can perform for the hooligans and the hordes if she wants to. But I don't have to. She can sniff the magic mist and just... Oh. Jack stopped. He dug into his brown bag. He pulled out the small bottle. Oh no, he moaned. Annie didn't have Merlin's magic mist. He did.